So first off, last night I was at the batting cages, and my oldest son Logan, who's 9, I've been teaching him just to hit the ball. That's it. We started him a little late in this thing, just to hit the ball. It's his first time. He never did t-ball, and I was behind him in the batting cage, and I was telling him to lean in. It's better if I do it like that, but I was telling him to lean in because he's right-handed, and I was telling him lean in and pull, and he didn't think that I was behind him. And he followed through with the tip of his bat touching the tip of my right testicle and absolutely crippled me. So right now I'm dealing with articulation problems where if I get crossed up somehow, there's a very large egg in my coin purse that is hard and painful right now, and it needs a little time to recover. So here's Eric's truck in the meantime. Another Vivian update. You guys have probably been following this thing for a little bit. We are just finishing some of the welding here. There's been like some areas. This truck has a lot of welding in it, clearly. All of them do, especially with TIG welding, just because the process takes a lot longer, especially with all the tube junctions. We double down, root pass, cover pass. And you know, my impatient self, it's always hard because I want to just weld everything right away. And this stuff really likes to be cooled down and kind of move through it methodically. So like the way to do this right for myself at least is to get a section, do a couple that make sense in that area, move around, do more, and kind of come back to them and work it like that, just because I always get a better end result if I'm patient and wait on some stuff. Some people also sit with like a air blower and give the thing a blow job until it cools down. Yes, please. So right now, gonna finish some of these like gnarly, I don't know what we call that right now, but I'll have something. Do that, and then today's episode is going to be bringing this outside. New tire and wheel package that are the permanent tire and wheel package, put that stuff on. The coilovers, there's like a weird spacing in here you can see. That's just to get our height right because we don't have extended rod ends and we need them for the bypass and the coilover in the rear. And we can't put the coil on the back of this thing until we have the rod ends in, the final rod end. So we'll just put a strut in here that's gonna hold it at ride height and let us do everything we wanna do. But I want to get it outside just to see it from a little further perspective. And we've done it before with a lot of vehicles. It's just nice to get them in a different element and be able to step back and look at it with the cab off, look at it with the cab on, talk about where we're going next. The axle's in, it is completely tabbed, completely welded, all done. We'll go over that stuff too. So I'm gonna finish my small portion of welding here just to get this area done, and then we'll go outside. I think we should talk about the axle before we put the wheel and tire on it, just because it's going to block a lot of the stuff going on here. It was under the table before, we didn't have it. It's a 4-inch camber housing, just their big fabricated thing. Big 3 1/4 hubs, trophy truck pattern, big 14-inch Coleman rotors, JMR calipers. Those are all Bluetooth right now. But what we wanted to do is just, this thing needed tabbing all the way through. We spec'd it to cycle properly, put it on, instead of just copying what was on the housing before, just put it in here, made the upper links kind of in a spot where they could move around if we needed to, and then cycled it all the way through full compression and full droop, just to see where that pinion angle is. The geometry on these things now, and you know, I've heard you guys say that, like, how do you set up a four link, and you know, can you do a video on that? And that's like a very loaded thing. We definitely have builds we can do that with, but I think a lot of people are keen to their own opinion on that stuff. And like, you know, just even on the pivots, you know, where the lower trailing arm pivot is in relation to how far away and how high the upper link pivot is, you know, on the chassis. And it's the same with this stuff, you know, like a lot of the plank style new line SI trucks, the lower trailing arm pivot is actually like almost horizontally mounted here. With this, we have only a few options just because of where this thing bumps. There's still some chassis up here with our rectangular tube guy that's living in there, and we can't really have that go any further back until it, you know, it'll just want to collide there. And even our bulkhead tab that'll be for the brake lines here can't be off the back of the housing. It needs to kind of be, you know, inside of the constraints of the housing. But stuff to look at here. Obviously the strike pad for the bumps. So still, we set this whole thing up, new pivots. These are all fabbed here, and then we have Izzy billet machine pivots here with just our plates to kind of capture the sides together. And then obviously Colin's been jamming on this thing. So 3/16 chromoly, well, we don't need to say chromoly anymore. I think we're done with that because everything is chromoly. 3/16 limit strap tab with the double shear, so we'll be running 3 straps. The sway bar tab is also an integrated bulkhead tab for the brake line. So that's all in one. And then obviously the strike pad is kind of built in to the limit strap tab as well. And that's also with a consumable aluminum plate on top. And I think what's nice here, like some bro science, is I think this will deaden the blow a little bit instead of just being directly on hard metal going to the housing. And also it's like a consumable. So not only are these nylon pads here very consumable, like these ones are already getting flattened out, but this is also like a secondary measure to swap out. And I don't know if maybe you needed to change something. You could always change the height of this, almost like a shim. But you know, at the end of the day, it just made sense to build them this way, bottom line. This stuff was all welded on the table. And then the other thing that kind of looked spooky was the sway bar in links here were very short. And when this thing would go up high, it would get like really twisted, you know, where it was almost like this angle with the arm going here and the rod going tight. And I just think when they start to get to that point, they get into almost a bind where they stop working properly. So we just wanted to extend this, make sure everything clears through the bump stop, and that's where we're at. But just so you guys can see it now, before we put the rest of the tire and wheel on it. I have ADHD, and it's not squirrel, it's like deep ADHD. So if I have something in my hand while I'm doing this stuff, it's like the Manchurian Candidate, right? Where they like have to be, they're doing like a special thing while they're being like moles or spies or something. So anyways, this is a really good point we're at, where we wanted to, just per usual with the vehicles, take them out and get a better perspective on these things outside. Being able to view something that you're working on in close quarters indoors, where you're, you know, especially for our little small studio area, you're talking 6 to 8 feet maybe on one side and 4 feet on the other side. So you don't, no matter what you think, you don't get an understanding for the proportions or the shapes or the actual feeling of the car until you are able to like step back and look at it. And this is the first time we've had everything complete, where we talked about the new axle going in, the track width being proper in the rear, shortened wheelbase, 125 inches, proper up travel setup again, so it's 14 inches from strike pad to the bottom of the bump. and the cab on. Everything is sitting where it needs to be. It will probably go a little lower. I just know from reference before that the bypass wanted 7 inches of stroke showing, of shaft showing in the front. So I know the front's gonna go a little lower. It might be a little stink bug. Some people want this thing, and then some people want, so, you know, to each his own. I think it's just based on the setup of the truck. We do have the tank in there. That needs to be fully welded, but all the stuff's done on that, so we can look at that. That's a 72-gallon tank. I think we did the math last time, but really this is just kind of this is our episode of looking at the truck outside and feeling the proportions and feeling its presence with the cab on and without. The other thing to note is the new Method bead locks. Those are the race wheels. I think they're like 103s, but we'll just put a thing in there if I messed it up, where we can have a font that shows what it actually is if my brain is like glitching. So obviously brand new 40s from Jackson Motorsports. The whole package, new shocks are in. They just don't have the rod ends yet. So I think we're at a point here now where we don't need the rear shock package. We can send them to Keith to put extended rod ends in like they need for the trailing arms. Everything's juiced. There's some really good details. So I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grab a smaller camera so I can kind of point and shoot the details. I don't know where to start with this thing. So what I'm gonna do is just kind of, I think we should cover some stuff that we're gonna only be able to notice while the cab is on, because we wanna take this off. Remember, another key thing too is this started, Colin and I both, like, it was really him. I was gonna do kind of a traditional cage that I'd usually do, like call it a spec cage or something. And Colin's like, we should try to do something different. And that's why, like, the halo and everything, it really started to turn into something else. But the number one thing was make this thing look, it doesn't have to look like the F100 when the cab's off, but just make it look like it's something good as a Truggy or just a raw chassis without the body on. Make it look right and don't make it look funky, because sometimes when you build a cage inside of a cab and then you take that thing off, it gets spooky. So this thing, like, we always kind of thought about that. Same with the shock mounts. And we can lead into that, but that was one of the things, is like, how can we make the shock mounts kind of work not just for being in the cab, but also when they're exposed with the cab off. And that's one of the things here. So part of the design here and the revision is making sure that the windowsill, when we put the sheet metal back in, that you can see there's kind of a void missing here, that everything clears, and you can see some of the exposed shock mount here. This is kind of a standard, like a MCD1 thing, is a finished miter with the junction welded into it. That's a partition miter though, so don't be fooled just because it's shiny. And one of the, that reveal, you could call it, where the shock mount comes out of the cab, that's gonna live there. And you can see there's a pretty tight notch in here, but that's all tailored so we can get that sheet metal back in here and put that window back in. Same with like everything in the lower portion. We kind of had this cab just set forward a little bit while Colin was kind of doing the shock mounts. I got some of the general profile, and then we kind of had to just test fit and trim to where it made sense, where that back window was gonna run a perimeter on there. Some more stuff you can kind of see with like the extra cab window. I guess I'll shoot, I think the sun's getting us a little bit. There we go. So it's a nice detail too, is seeing that the extra cab window with like this V coming in, and you can really see some of the shock mount in here. Good symmetry, everything sights really well if you kind of sight the tubes. Everything works. The big thing we'll kind of go into once the cab is off is all of like this big, like the mothership junction there on each side where the pivots are, and that's kind of the transition from the frame to the outside structure here and where all the tube structure goes. But those are big, nasty things that we got finished that are really impressive to look at least for myself. It's a good time to kind of look at what we were talking about too, with the windshield cowl and the actual like dash structure here, or the instrument panel structure here, and that we need to have a trim piece in here that'll span across, and this will be removable, as well as I think this middle portion will have to be removable as well, just so if you did need to pull the engine, you don't have to pull the cab. I don't think it's going to be an extreme chore to pull the cab, So we'll have to kind of evaluate that. What's going to take more time? Is it worth just unbolting this whole thing just to take the motor out, or should we just, you know, sacrifice some of the cowl here and make that removable so we can access in there? But you can kind of just tell where this stuff is, and you can also see like everything's pretty tidy in here. The cab itself still needs to come back, because when it does come back, this gap turns into nothing and it just seats right up. But you can kind of see it's a really cool kind of cropped look in here. The F100 windshield, the height on this compared to like a production, like a newer late model car or truck, is so much narrower, and it kind of gives that chopped look. You can also see the detail where the you know, the dash and the secondary A-pillar tube gusset kind of just dives into there, and you don't actually see the other part of the structure. I've been doing the best I can to start chasing some of the welding on here to finalize it. There's a lot, it's still not done. You can see kind of some of the details on some of the outer structures. The middle portions complete. The bulkhead, like we talked about, where the pivots are, is all done. Something else to look at. So like the next phase, we're gonna wanna tie the cab into this thing and fix it in a position where once we do fix it, we can start routing the exhaust where it's got just enough space where it can go through in between the interior of the cab sheet metal and the outside of the chassis here, and we can weasel this thing right through here, kind of run it. Let's get on the other side over there. Can kind of run it up this tube and then exit through the cab right below like the dent here. So we'll have a real win there with that exit, but something we should talk about is the bedside, so let's lean into that. So when we first started this thing, the initial kind of, I guess, groundwork or foundation for figuring out where the cab needed to be and, you know, give it reference was where this front tire was going to be. You've seen my thing, and it's really about getting this tire in the wheel opening proper, where we wanted to stay away from that thing of having the wheel opening that's close to the firewall be, you know, disproportioned, where it's like it looks like this tire hit a wall and mushed back a couple inches. So that's kind of, we set the cab loosely on this thing. I got the fender on here where it needed to go, and it's really easy because it's got like a hard 90 that the index is into there, and got this thing perfectly where we wanted it. And then kind of that set the groundwork for the cab. With that, shorten the wheelbase 10 inches to get it to like trophy truck spec, or at least something that I think is an optimal platform for this, which is 125 inches of wheelbase. So from center to center, 125, and we knew that there would be like some shortening from end of the cab to front of the rear tires. That's fine. I think it's super style points to have indexed cab into the fender. I'm kind of going to hold it up there to show you. But that's what you'll notice here. It's almost, the cab is almost perfectly centered in between the front and the rear wheels. You know what this Bronco looks like, right? It looks like it's for a movie. Like, oh yeah, we're gonna need a 1986, we're gonna need Broncos, blah, blah. And then like, okay, here you go. And it's just like a time capsule. All right. This is your McQueen glass, black gel coat. We'll just kind of go Imagineering again here. Is that about right? So you can see there's some sick overlap on this thing. And that's just how it's gonna be. And what that means is, Joey, if you wanna get over here, we will want to take a lot of this. And since you'll see that there's a return here. You'd call that a return. And we'll cut this almost where it's just flush with the material thickness of the fiberglass on the outside and fit it to the cab, and then also notch the tire in there and get this thing right where it needs to be. It's probably not gonna need too much out back, but really this is gonna be where we get the win here. So this thing, I always kind of stress not having a dovetail, meaning like where the cab is narrow and then your bedside is like kicked out crazy. Like if you looked at it from the outside, it looks like it's got, you know, a poopy diaper or something on the back, which will blown out. So we'll try to, you know, stress not having that. Since we are wider now than we were with the rear axle, there'll probably be a little bit of it, but I don't think it's gonna be something dramatic where it looks super bowed out. I'm gonna take these guys off. They're just up here for proof of concept to see the proportions. Like in general, my feelings on this are great. I think that it's like we kind of got exactly what we wanted out of it, and this is like a complete proof of functionality where it's, you know, that we built this around what specs we wanted, width and length as far as the wheelbase, the up travel, everything, and like this is what we got out of it, and it's really cool to see that and see it manifest. The structure, you know, again, with taking this thing and taking the cab off, the structure still really works, and as many tubes as we put in this thing, looking at it with the cab off, it doesn't look as busy as I anticipated, and it just looks like a proper structure. So we did get the hold downs done for the fuel tank, so I'll take these off to look at that, and then I think we might be able to take the cab off. So something else we were working on, I don't remember necessarily where we are at exactly with the fuel tank, but I know we did cover it. We covered the concept of the hold down, so those are done. It's kind of a fun detail to do, is to, you know, put tube, that's an offset 1-inch 250 wall tube in there that takes a 5/8 bolt, but that thing is notched in there into that tube a little higher than the middle. And these are just really simple hold downs. So obviously like a threaded bung, a step bung that goes into 1-inch tubing, and then links up to a boss again, just a double sheared tab system here. The other detail with this is the plates. So all this plate work in here, I'll get these off and I'll show you. So layout here, same with design, you know, figuring out where these spares are gonna go, you know, driver, passenger, and then figuring out where our fill is going to need to be, and the fill is going to want to be at the highest point of the tank, and then the breather and the return, and we've kind of just laid that stuff out on the template to make sure it works. Then what's going to be in here, these are all threaded, and I'll show you what's under there, but these are going to be 12 points with safety wire, and I think we'll be able to get a win with just doing like 2 at a time, safety wiring each 2 of them. And it's a very similar construction to what you'd have on, you know, a normal like fuel safe fuel cell. So let me get this one undone. And what's going on under there is a 1/4-inch piece of aluminum under the 1/8 here, and then it's welded, and then these are completely tapped. So they're all drilled under, and then they're tapped all the way through. So there's 3/8 of threaded grip in here. And then what we'll do is we'll put a gasket on here, and this bottom one, since it's lower on the truck, that's gonna be for our pickup. So we'll have an AN fitting, a bulkhead here with a pickup line going all the way down to the bottom, and there's also a trough in here. So it's not just sloshing, but it's got like another like redundant trough for the actual fuel pickup when it gets low. I held it up there for a little bit. You can see there's a pretty good example. So Colin, you can see he's got pro riding here. I'm glad this, wait, oh, I was gonna say the spelling's right. Oh, ride height. I get it, it's H-I-G-H-T, it almost works. You just missed an E, you know? But hey, you built a badass truck, dude. We cannot doubt that. So like I said, Colin's, I talk about this thing, but this is Colin's like thing. He's built, Jesse came in and helped with some of the tube work. Alex helped with the tank, but you know, it's Colin's day in, day out program here, so I have to give him credit. It's beautiful to watch that. We just got to work on the spelling. You don't want to see what he did. Anyways, what I was getting at is the bump travel is awesome still. Like, you know, if you guys remember when Eric's truck came in a while back and it was still in Tundra form and we had to do the spooked out links, or the trailing arms, and, you know, try to adjust the bumps, we notched the chassis that was in here. And then we also raised and mounted the bump stops a lot higher. So you can see like what we got here is pretty substantial. And that was really a key to the success of this thing. Besides adding some weight bias, and now that we have a 72-gallon tank back here, that's about 600 pounds of fuel. And that's gonna do exactly what we need. I think what we should do is get the cab off and go from there. So here it is now, different form. This is our Vivian Truggy edition, or call it Vivian T. I'm gonna leave that one alone. Yeah, I mean, obviously you can see the structure now. It all together now, it doesn't seem complicated. It seems pretty simple. Obviously, like a really nice win to me is that C pillar to B pillar transition, where it's not your traditional, where you'd have like a tube here and then like a tube here, and you do that, and it makes sense and it flows. It's good for ingress egress, which is like getting in and out of the vehicle. Makes that nice. No matter what third seat, like you're not going through here. You're always going to kind of have to crawl through the, you know, in between the driver and passenger. But this really gives you kind of an idea of the proportions. The coilover, like we stated, doesn't have the extended rod end, so the actual, like the lower carrier of the coil, it would bind if it wouldn't work. Once there's a coilover in there, it'll have much more of a presence where there's a big, you know, 3-inch coilover with a big coil on it. That will all kind of make sense. But you can really just see like the layout and the proportions. It's very simplified now. I think what we can do is kind of talk about a couple details and then just get into what's going to go down next on this thing. Just for some details, since this is all done, there's a real, I don't know if you'd call it uncomfortable, but we had a lot of stuff going on here. I built the pivot boxes, we put those onto the end of the frame. Had some of the stuff landing where it needed to encapsulate the structure. I did not want to have it where it was like one tube with a bunch of tubes going to it, like as a junction, because, you know, we are tying into the China frame, and then we are tying into a pivot box, and this thing, like, I feel like dispersing the load and all the stresses into a structure is the best thing to do here. So that's what we have. But on that note, there was like layers to this thing, right? So the pivot box went on, the C to B pillar, the CB pillar went on, the door bar went on, and then we had these tubes, these 065 guys that we're tying in here, and they couldn't go on yet until we got all the welding done that was under here, because this tube goes all the way, bink, and hits this junction in here. So Colin got all of the plate work done on here, and now it's all fully welded. It's been kind of a good team collective here, but you can kind of see the detail here and how solid this is. It's something that's it's really interesting to look at, and it's very satisfying. You'll see a lot of these, so you know you can't win them all on some stuff, and I think like with Selena, the Beam Tundra, Sean thought about it more than Colin and I did, as far as when you have a bunch of tube structure like this, you have to have a pressure relief, especially for TIG welding. I don't know so much about MIG welding, but definitely with TIG, you know, if you start putting big heat into this stuff, the gas and the pressure inside will want to blow through your weld and make for a bad day and lots of repairs, and make either the weld harder to get proper, or just make you have to redo things. So you'll see a couple of the 1/8-inch holes here, and I just put them in spots where I can fill it and clean it when this thing's ready to get painted or powder coated. But you know, another look at that stuff, I'll go under here, kind of see the work like this too. So the the trailing arm bolt here is recessed into here, and then all this plate work is like just extreme tie-in from the frame to kind of transition into the pivots. One of the other things I think you guys saw either on Instagram or maybe, I don't know if we had it on one of the updates, but there is some really gnarly notched tubes. And where those tubes are, I can show you. Those tubes are our lower skid profile. So from the rear of the front bulkhead here where the lower pivots are, this tube spans all the way under here, and that's where this notch is. Big, nasty, long notch. Grabs the bottom of the frame offset. Then also goes up onto the side of the frame, splits the difference, and then also wraps around this tube. So there's a lot to unpack there, but you can see everything's kind of starting to make sense under here. Move to the shock mounts. Going back to what I was talking about before, the shock mounts, like a lot of this structure needed to be something that works not just with the cab on, but with the cab off. And you can see like we've got some different draft angles in here instead of a traditional shock mount that would kind of be boxy and squared. It's just adding some elements of, you know, like dynamic design here, where this beveled portion is kicked back and it's kind of flowing out towards the car or out away from the car. And then on the opposite side, you can see it's twisted and it's going in, and it's really interesting to look at because from a lot of angles, it looks like a tiny little shock mount, but it's actually really wide. It's just clamshelled together. You can also see, you can see the finished miter here, and then our junctions welded to it. Things to look forward to next update. The coilover, bypass mount, all that stuff is done. Rear axle's done. What we want to do is just, there's some stuff that's sensitive here where we can't move forward until the cab is fixed in position, and that means like still bolt on, but at least where it's not shifting or moving around in any way. One of the things is to do the exhaust. The exhaust wants to run like we've talked about, come out of here, make room for a muffler, and then pop that thing out right below the extra cab window, probably below the dent on the body line, and have that thing exit. What has to happen before that exhaust is we need to mount the bedside and index the bedside into the cab so we know exactly where that exhaust is going to be, because there's so much bedside on the cab that we need that information before we can move forward with like notching any of this stuff here. So in a particular order, hard mount the cab, bump the thing, bedside mounts, get the bedsides indexed in here, and then do the exhaust. We can probably even start laying out hood, front fender mounts, grill mounts, do all the extremities like that. The same time we can be finishing up the fuel tank, so that will for sure be done next time you check in. And then also start laying out some floor stuff. I have this tape in here. I think we looked at that earlier, but I don't know if we talked about it. But this is another tube I'd like to add just to finish this thing off, and it'll lend to really good sheet metal or floor in there. So it's almost like a little tail coming off of this core here. When we do, and I have these things I call cores, and there's a lot of cores in this thing where they're, you know, 6 tube, 7 tube junctions. So obviously this guy here is a core, and then that's like our center core. And I don't even know what you'd call that thing. That's just the Death Star. So, you know, look forward to more welding done. Been chipping away at it. A lot of this stuff is finaled, but you know, we do have, there's some stuff on the top, some more stuff on the gussets here. And then obviously there's some silicone bronze here, but we really just want to press forward with actually getting the big chunks done. Some of the welding can still be done later. There's enough there that it's fine. But really like figuring out where the glass goes, getting that all mounted, getting substructures for the glass mounts, and then also getting that exhaust all the way where it needs to go. That plumb and square all done, and we can start moving into the front too. But some of the sheet metal work in here, as far as like the paneling, it's becoming a lot clearer the more time that I spend around the truck or look at it every day, what we're gonna do. So I think we'll have some pretty exciting stuff with that. Merch. Still have some shirts. Need to do a big order. I'm out of hats. Everybody's asking about hats. Aprons obviously need to restock, so we'll get on that stuff. Thank you guys for all the support. Have an awesome Monday. Like, comment, subscribe. Bye. See you. Bye.